Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Backlog Banter. Touch generations is not something you hear talked about very much in the modern day, but I spent a little too much money. Frankly, it wasn't that much for how many games I got, but I spent a little bit too much money purchasing every single North American released Touch Generations game. And we're here to sort of talk about what this was for Nintendo, an odd period of their history that I think goes overlooked because almost none of these games are traditionally respected Nintendo games. Basically none of them. And that means that there's like 30 Nintendo published / developed games that are just kind of forgotten in time. And so we're going to talk about that today. Why they went to the way of the dodo, as they say.
Fair enough.
Why Nintendo made the software, the teams that they teamed up with, the genres and different types of software that this brand, this sub-series covers. And Abram, you're much less experienced with Touch Generations than I am, but I feel like through me talking about them and through looking at these different games and just being a general Nintendo guy, you understand what's going on here. So
I mean, what's going on here, because people can't see beyond the frame here. There's an asinine number of games surrounding us on the table here.
I didn't do the counting, but I mean, you can do I can do a little counting while you talk.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a stack of 6 right there, and that's one of 5 stacks on the table we have across Wii and DS.
Yes.
Before we get into it though, I think we got to back up.
We got to back up.
Yeah. What is Touch Generations? How would you explain this?
Well, I'm just going to read a little bit off the Wikipedia article here, so I don't fuck it up.
That's fair enough.
So I don't provide you with any false information.
That's fair enough.
Touch Generations is a brand created by Nintendo to denote video games on the DS and Wii that are intended to appeal to a broader audience, mainly adults and the elderly, it says it on the Wikipedia, more to show than the traditional gamer. Nintendo initially conceived the brand alongside the DS in Japan as a response to the country's faster population aging rate compared to Western regions, seeking to attract audiences outside its traditional target market of young hardcore gamers to supplement its player base. And if you know anything about this generation of Nintendo, they were doing that hard. And it succeeded for them in terms of how many people had their hardware and were purchasing their software. This paid off. But a lot of these games, again, because it's skewing towards a different demographic, they aren't particularly relevant to people like us. We weren't playing most of these games, almost any of them, when we were that young. Sure. The Wii ones, I think, were a little more popular, but there we go. We established it. Touch Generations.
It's interesting because as you sort of read out that description of the brand to me, it immediately makes me think of, obviously, Satoru Iwata's philosophy of appealing to the blue ocean. And the blue ocean, even though people try to sometimes, I think, in our circles, make it like a Nintendo or gaming term, it's not. It's a mass market business term. Which essentially just means...
it's just only relevant to us through the lens of Wii and DS software.
Right. It essentially means the idea of making products that appeal to a non-traditional consumer. Now, the difference between Touch Generations and sort of the philosophy of the generation on the whole, it feels like to me, is that overall, the goal of the Wii and the DS was to get everyone to play.
Yeah.
But the goal of a lot of the software we have on the table here is to get particular demographics to play. These older generations, as you said. Mm-hmm. But I also think that Touch Generations, in some ways, in my opinion, is not a useful label.
Oh, I would agree.
Because I think that even just in this description here, we've got a lot of games on the table that I don't think fit that.
Sure. Yeah, and there even are a couple of outliers. We're going to spend most of this video talking about the weirder pieces of software, the ones that are completely non-traditional, but there are a few that are a little bit more traditional and still have some relevance today. So if you'll show a couple of Wii games over there, we have the Endless Ocean series from Arika, which are underwater sea exploration games.
They're back in the zeitgeist now. We got Endless Ocean Luminous in 2 months.
But they're not particularly... I mean, I don't see that older people were particularly going towards Endless Ocean.
Yeah.
And another big one here, I think this is probably the one that gets the most fanfare from hardcore gamers, Elite Beat Agents. On the cover right there, Touch Generations. This is a Touch Generations game, but it certainly wasn't appealing to older people.
Yeah, this is kind of my point, right? Because if you think about even just these Wii titles here, right? Wii Sports, obviously, we just have Wii Sports Resort here. We've got a disc-only copy floating somewhere in the background, but Wii Sports is pretty easily targeted to everybody. grandparents were playing a lot of Wii Sports. Wii's were in a lot of like retirement homes for people to play Wii Sports. So I see how that could fit, although it also does sort of cross all ages and demographics.
Definitely, yeah. Which is also why that series in particular escapes from being something that has that feels like touch generation's derogatory. It is touch generations by tangent, and it is also true because there were a couple of these games, and Wii Sports in particular, that wasn't a touch generations game when it came out because touch generations as a label had not started yet. There are a few of these games that I'll show you guys when we're holding up that don't have touch generations anywhere on the box. For the Wii games, they're up in the corner here. For DS games, they're in the bottom corner. But taking a look at even just True Swing Golf, this came out before touch generations, and it was retroactively relabeled a touch generations game, and similar to Wii Sports. So they kind of took a look at the game that they had already put out and be like, oh, what kind of fits into this area?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm just checking on the Wikipedia page. It's like Wii Sports Resort here. It's just a retail copy of the game. Does not feature the actual branding on it anywhere.
I think also by a certain point they had stopped. Denoting.
Which makes this a pretty short window of time, right? Because when do we have here as it's starting? The first one is 2007?
Let me... Introduced in Japan in June 2005.
Sure.
So I'm not exactly sure what the Japanese... I think it was rolled out in different areas in different ways. Yeah. Because also another interesting thing that we can't really talk about too much in depth here, but is touch generations means different things and includes different games in different territories.
Sure.
There are a ton of Japanese exclusive touch generations game, primarily like financial management and teaching you English and face muscle exercises. And there's in Europe there's a couple of exclusive cookbook ones. So even I think most relevantly to us, Trace Memory and Another Code R are touch generations games in Europe, but not in America. And so there are different delineations of what counts and what doesn't depending on the region.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why I find it so interesting. And I do go back a little bit to the idea of like, who is this for? Because again, what you read out denotes a very specific group of people. And I think that's a group of people that's going to gravitate towards some of the things you have on this side of the table. Yeah. Like 100 classic books.
Sure. Yeah, let's take that.
Yeah, you got that right there.
Which is not really a piece of... It's not really a game. It's barely even software. It is literally just the 100 free books, 100 royalty free, not royalty free. What's the copyright free?
I don't know if these were all public domain at the time though. I'm sure they made some kind of deal.
100 bucks, and because it's not even really a game, it doesn't even have an ESRB rating, which I believe is the only one that doesn't have that. But that's just a bizarre thing. Like Nintendo published this game. It has Nintendo in the corner, but it does not have ESRB. Which I wonder how many Nintendo published games don't have an ESRB.
I would imagine that
maybe just one.
The only you'd have to go back to before the ESRB was created to find another one. I would imagine. Sure. Also, this game made by a friend of the show, HarperCollins.
Even Personal Trainer Cooking has an ESRB, which is just a cookbook, and there are a couple other cookbook ones.
I would argue that you should put that ESRB rating higher if you're gonna start including open flame into your game design. Maybe
that in real life, yes.
And so this is my point, right? You understand when you read the description you gave me that something like your classic books, your Japanese only face and muscle training software. That makes perfect sense, right? But we've got over here also Nintendogs. Yeah. Nintendogs was a very, very, very successful, long-running Nintendo series that appealed a lot to kids our age. Kids who, had Tamagotchis or the various derivatives of that product line. This, to me, is very different than this.
Sure.
But both of these are very different than Elite Beat Agents, which requires a very high degree of skill.
It was tough for even me, and I beat
it's hard for me too. And even those are very different than Endless Ocean. Then is different than Wii Sports or Wii Fit or anything. So I guess I'm curious what you think of like the uniting principle between these games, because I don't know if it's necessarily demographic.
Sure.
What would you say it is? Because you've played most of these games. I've
played most of them.
I've played the ones that are on Wii and Elite Beat Agents, a couple specific ones, but you know way more about the actual hands-on experience of these games.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly can't say it's genre. Yeah. But I think you can say it's not certain genres, which is what I think.
That's fair.
Which is, I think is actually the uniting factor between all of these.
Yeah.
Outside of a few key examples, a couple of puzzle games are significant amount of puzzle games. All of those are puzzle games there if you want to hold those up and sort of flip through them.
Sure.
Games like Tetris DS and some Picross games, Sudoku. There's a crossword game. Those are puzzle games. Puzzle games are a genre that a lot of people play, but they also are a genre that appeals to more people than hardcore gamers. And also, in some ways, puzzle games are essentially puzzle games like this are less appealing to hardcore gamers and are kind of the games that, especially on mobile and I guess probably started on DS, that people just played sort of in the background as a time waster.
Right.
So puzzle games and then rhythm games, Elite Beat Agents, and also Rhythm Heaven. And I just want to clarify. I just want to admit something. I own Rhythm Heaven. I have it. The have case. It is not here. It is the only game that is not here. So I just want to make sure everyone knows I do have it.
Submit it.
It's not here.
Here's the game.
It's not with us. But rhythm games and puzzle games, and then I guess like sports games, if you're counting Wii Sports, are kind of the only genres that are encapsulated by touch generations that appeal to traditional gaming. That we don't see any platformers here. We don't see any shooting games. We don't see any RPGs.
Sure.
The traditional games that people consider Nintendo games and purchase consoles for are largely excluded from this lineup. And so I think, again, it is the genres that it's not that is what touch generations is, and it's the other things that sort of fill around the sides of one-off strange things, software that isn't quite a game that is actually what fits into touch generations.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately we have to acknowledge is that the label's kind of a sneak, right?
Absolutely.
And I think it is way easier to support what you're saying, because I agree with you in large part, if you are to basically axe the Wii games from this conversation.
Sure. And there's a couple of more over here. We have Wii Play, Wii Music, and Wii Party that are all also touch generations games.
And I think the reason why, for the sake of this conversation, these are less interesting to me, even though these are the games I've actually played, is because the reason I answer the question is because I have a different hypothesis.
Okay, sure.
My hypothesis is that touch generations in its purest form is like a genre of teaching.
Sure.
And this is, and I don't know quite how to phrase it, but
teaching you music, teaching you sports, teaching you play, teaching you ocean.
Like it's kind of like square peg and round hole with those games. But if you look at a lot of this other stuff, it is teaching you skills. It's teaching you math. You're holding up personal trainer math.
Yeah. Well, let's go through some of these more teaching-oriented games. We already showed 100 classic books, which does not teach you.
It's still educational.
Yeah, I mean, it is educational software.
Frankly, this is the closest Nintendo's ever gotten outside of like fucking Mario teaches typing to making edutainment software.
Sure.
And in some cases, interestingly, like the 100 classic books, just the edu part, because it's not even really attainment other than the intrinsic pleasure of reading.
Yeah.
So let's investigate this idea and see if this hypothesis fits.
Education.
Yeah,
correct.
Let's see if this fits.
So I think one of the more obvious ones is the two that I have here, cooking software designed and published by Nintendo. This is America's Test Kitchen, Let's Get Cooking, which is one of the few Nintendo games that has live action people on the cover.
Yeah, alongside Wii Fit, which is over here.
Oh yeah, the Wii Fit games, yes.
People on those covers.
And Personal Trainer Cooking, which I have actually used, like 4 or 5 times, and made some dishes.
My hand to God, we have gone to the grocery store several times together with Tucker bringing his 3DS.
Yes, there is photographic evidence.
Yes, there is photographic evidence. And checking things off, because the game is like a shopping list.
Yes.
Checking things off the shopping list so we put them into the cart.
Yeah, and this is, I think, one of the ones that most appeals to me, and why I've actually used it multiple times is because there isn't really anything else like this. It's not like third parties were designing cooking software for DS.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe there were some, but certainly they weren't as popular. I mean, I don't even know how popular this was necessarily. But it feels so outside of Nintendo's development and publishing wheelhouse that it just immediately intrigues me. I'm like, what? Nintendo designed and published multiple? Not only 2 here, but as I said, there's some ones exclusive to Europe and ones exclusive to Japan. It's like 5 or 6 cooking pieces of cooking software that Nintendo published.
And I want to stick
DS.
on this for a second also, because, and I just did a quick Google to double check. The first iPhone released in 2007.
Okay.
And obviously, people weren't immediately running out and adopting the iPhone.
Yeah.
But the iPhone was the beginning of the revolution that makes things like this obsolete.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, it's fun walking in the grocery store with you as you're pulling out your 3DS to make a shopping list and find your recipes.
It's more of like a point and laugh kind of fun, though.
It's definitely
it's laughing at me, not with me.
No, it's definitely at you.
Yeah.
It's fun. Let's make that clear. It's at you. But these were of an era, even though they did release post iPhone. Mm-hmm. They released of a time when you could probably make a good case for the adoption of DS being significantly higher than the adoption of the
I think
iPhone.
That's probably true, yeah.
And so if you already have your DS in your pocket and you go into the grocery store, this is an intuitive piece of software. It's this sort of thing that you'd now expect to be like an app.
Absolutely. And that's actually what a good chunk of these sort of fall into. Some of the more basic puzzle games are things that are much more popular as apps and frankly make a lot more sense, obviously, in the modern day, but even quickly after they were released as apps. Crossword puzzles, Sudoku. Yeah. These are things that you just do for a couple of minutes in your spare time throughout the day. And it is very interesting to see something like just a straight up Sudoku game published by Nintendo that... what was it going? Just in general, it's just strange.
The fact that they did it is very interesting because again, they're very no frills.
Yeah,
I mean, we've got Clubhouse Games over here, right? Mm-hmm. Clubhouse Games, developed by ND Cube. Mm-hmm. I believe the first one was also, right?
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah, the second one definitely is the one on Switch. And when you play the one on Switch, because I've not played the DS one, but I played a lot of the one on Switch. It's a very clean presentation. It feels very Nintendo. It's full of extra modes and it's very robust.
Yeah.
But, these are not robust pieces of software.
No.
Unless I am gravely mistaken as to how these unfold.
Well, I mean, I don't know. It depends on what you mean, because presentationally,
I guess that's more what I mean.
But for the content of these games, what you expect from that kind of software-wise, they're pretty deep. I mean, the Person Trainer Cooking has like 260 recipes on it, and it has a globe that you can move around to find a country where you want recipes from. You can sort it by ingredients. You can make your own. Like there's a kitchen timer. There's like the histories of certain things. It really goes very in depth.
That's fair. Then.
And for crosswords and Sudoku, I mean, like there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of puzzles. Right. So they look pretty lame on a presentation level, but they do a lot for what they're going for.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe it's more just the point of, you look at this box to me and I see, okay, somebody's making like beef skewers or something.
Sure, yeah. Kebabs of some kind.
And then we've got just like a nice little array of stuffed tomato and sushi and other kinds of shit. But this doesn't scream Nintendo. It doesn't even scream video game. Yeah. And I think that's an interesting way to classify some of these games. And again, it comes down to this idea of us needing to sub-classify even the touch generation stuff.
Yeah.
One more note, just on this stuff though, this does remind me of some DSiWare that I used quite a lot on my DS, because Nintendo released in this era Mario Clock, Animal Crossing Clock, Mario Calculator, Animal Crossing Calculator. There might have been others, but those are the ones I remember.
Yeah.
And so there definitely was this spirit during this time that specifically the DSi could be more than just a game system. And I think it definitely was echoing the shift in cell phones becoming sort of all purpose devices. Yeah. Because also, if you remember, I remember reading about this a lot in Nintendo Power. The Nintendo DSi XL was specifically basically marketed as a larger DS for people, frankly, for older people.
Yes. With the worse vision.
With the big fountain pen style stylus. And I remember it being advertised with 100 classic books.
Oh, really? Really? That's in magazines? Or?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know if maybe there's a live action TV ad of someone using the big fountain pen and reading 100 classic books very fan, let's go.
Yeah, so I think that's definitely this dimension of the Blue Ocean era that I think people forget about. This idea of, what if not only games appealed to more people, but what if our game systems did productivity tasks?
Absolutely. And that, I think, is the point of Touch Generations. And Touch Generations as an initiative from Nintendo, not as a label, because I do think that the label is pretty useless ultimately, because in order to know what Touch Generations is, you have to be in the know of Nintendo. It's not like you're an older person, your first thought is, I want a cookbook. Your first thought is not, I'm going to go to the store, buy a DS, and find a piece of software in the game section of Best Buy or Target. I don't even know the stores that were around back then.
Yeah.
That's not going to be the answer. But the initiative is to make a piece of hardware that is initially designed for games and was most popular and is continuing to be known now as a system designed for video games that can do other things and be just a general device that you can have in your pocket and take out and can do multiple things through changing the cartridge and all that. But that is what I think Nintendo wanted this line of software to be, is make the DS something that is not just for games. That is something that let's just put it out there, normal person can have in their life and not feel like it's a weird gaming thing. If there's enough software and it does enough things, it can just be a productivity thing that you take about around your day and do a little bit of this, do a little of that, and improve your life.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in how this game is marketed. This is America's Test Kitchen, Let's Get Cooking. It's a mother and a daughter cooking together with just the DSi in the foreground. Mm-hmm. And I think that this does sort of make me think about the position Nintendo is in now. Mm-hmm. When Nintendo is kind of moving more in the direction of wanting to be a Disney-style everything company, like a lifestyle company.
But an entertainment company, first and foremost. A lot of these are not necessarily entertainment. And I think it would be very, very a very interesting thing if they, now that they're going like lifestyle, if they had this kind of software. But they seem to be steering clear of that.
Well, that's what I was alluding to, and I think it'd be interesting to see if they ever were to consider it. Just in that, clearly the hope was that to some extent, your Nintendo system just became part of your life.
Yes,
I mean that's a large part of what what Wii Fit wanted to be.
Yeah.
You were supposed to check in with Wii Fit every week. You're supposed to monitor your weight and your BMI and everything. And so it would be curious to see Nintendo return to this idea of being in every dimension of your life.
Yeah.
Because they've not been in that for a long time. The closest they've gotten is definitely Ring Fit Adventure.
Sure.
Which is not only a great piece of fitness software, a better piece of fitness software than Wii Fit, but also uses the Switch's hardware in ways that I don't really know if any other games do.
No,
like setting the timers to go off to remind you to play the game when your Switch is in handheld mode, or letting you get in reps just by squeezing the Joy-Con when the system is off. Mm-hmm. That's the closest in spirit, I think, to what we've got going on here.
Yeah, and the closest analog that I can compare to any of the best piece of software here that exemplifies what you're saying is my beloved child, personal trainer walking.
Yeah.
I've got the complete box. I recorded and uploaded, but I don't think I made it public.
You never posted it.
A video of me unboxing this for the first time because it was sealed when I got it. And this is a piece of software that is designed by Nintendo and Creatures, the Pokemon, the team involved with some Pokemon stuff, that is just a pedometer and a software that you connect the pedometer to at the end of the day to see when you were up and about throughout the day, how many steps you took.
Yeah.
That's basically it. This is pretty bare bones. It is, I think, more impressive than it could be because it has a little charming thing where like this little pedometer guy comes up and he's like, oh, you were a morning deer today. That means in the morning you had some vigorous activity.
Sure.
And you can use your steps to like power some lights to like make the world light up. There's a little bit of gamification here. But this, I have been using literally daily for 3 weeks, I think, is somewhere around that, which is by far the most I've ever used lifestyle software, period.
Yeah.
And I'm not getting much out of it. I like the idea of being the guy who has and uses personal trainer walking.
Right.
I think that's why I'm doing it, frankly. But this is just pure Nintendo is in your life. Keep something that Nintendo designed and produced in your pocket.
Yeah.
And check in at the end of the day, because your life was happening and you were walking around and you carried this with you. And there you go. And it has certainly made me use my DS more frequently on a day-to-day basis than I have in years. I mean, I use my DS every other month or something like that to check in, play some random game. But I've been using my DS basically daily. Like before I go to bed, you hold down the button, you point it at the the personal trainer cartridge, which has a little sensor in it inside the cartridge, which is interesting. But it's very different for me to actually make this a part of my life. Then because I play a lot of video games, but I certainly don't use them to do whatever I'm doing with this.
Yeah.
To have this little green light make me want to take a walk.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because on one hand, like, there's no reason for you to do this at all.
Not. Yeah.
There's about a million other devices, including one you already have in your pocket at all times, that would do this for you. But I think this goes to highlight that if it's compelling to you now, imagine how compelling it would have been to you at the time.
Sure.
And I think it just goes back to, again, this notion.
When I was, what was it, 7? 0. I hated walking. I hated going outside.
If you were as old as you are now and when this came out.
Sure, let's go with that.
And I understand the appeal of it through that lens to an extent, right? But then you also have to wonder, like, were you really going to pay full price? Were you going to walk into a store and buy this?
No. And I think that is the other thing that really is kind of a internal conflict for me. Yeah. Is I find this fascinating. Clearly, some of it was successful, but the vast majority of it, I don't think was. I mean, it could have been very particularly expensive to produce because they are relatively bare bones packages. But I don't think almost any of these games sold a ton of copies. They were just out there to fill specific niches to show the possibility of what specifically the DS hardware could do. There are a few outliers. Primarily the Brain Age games and Nintendogs, which we showed earlier, and some of the Wii ones, which were huge successes, and I think are the key examples of where gamification, Nintendo charm, and a unusual genre of game design all coalesced to make something that not only appealed to the Blue Ocean random person on the street, but also to Nintendo fans that played your Wii Sports and your Wii Fits and your Nintendogs because it was something that still had Nintendo's charm in it, which most of this is lacking.
Yeah, I mean, the games you're holding up have, and we've got Big Brain Academy here as well. These not, and actually also Art Academy is a good example here of having mascot characters, of having a feel to them that go on to persist and get a shit ton of sequels. I mean, Art Academy is on DS, 3DS, and Wii U. Yeah. Nintendogs obviously had a ton of entries between DS and 3DS. Brain Age continues to this day. Big Brain Academy continues to this day. And I do think that part of that is because they are lovable in a way that these games aren't. I mean, I think that Personal Trainer Walking is very lovable. I mean, I really like the packaging scheme. It uses the Mii's. There's a lot that's very compelling about this. I mean, there's just obviously no meat on this bone at all, unlike these games, which are actually substantive games and sold as a result of that. So I think it is interesting that we've got almost another subgenre here, which are the more archetypal games in their presentation and feel, even though they're still casual, that continued on and had a much longer shelf life. And again, I'm largely discounting this stack of Wii games from the conversation because almost all of the, or well, put it this way, about 50-50 are in the top selling Wii titles, period. And others like Endless Ocean now have relevance again.
Yes.
Same with Big Brain Academy.
As of like literally 2 weeks ago.
Right. So I think a lot of what we're saying is a lot more germane to the weird DS stuff. On
yeah, but I like that there is this breadth and scope of Personal Trainer. I was looking at it. It was calling my eyes. And my brain just was overtaken of Touch Generations. Yeah. Because you go from something like Personal Trainer Math or True Swing Golf, which it doesn't have the thing on the cover, but it is a Touch Generations game, I promise you.
And looks the second most like shovelware.
Yes. This absolutely looks like shovelware.
Actually, this is the third. It looks the third most like shovelware.
This is definitely the most shovelware. This is Mystery Case Files Millionaire, which Nintendo published this game, but this team has been making these games to this very day. This team is still making these I Spy ass games. But he also wanted to show.
I think this also looks like shovelware. Master of Illusion.
Sure, it does, but also that's where Barbara the Bat originated, and she's an assist trophy in Smash.
That's fair enough.
and I don't have it, but it came with a Nintendo-produced set of playing cards. It teaches you how to do some magic tricks.
There is also like a really nerdy intrigue to that, considering Nintendo began as a playing card company.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Yeah. Where was I going with that? Was this? Oh, we started going off on other tangents.
No, you're just making the good point that we're running the gamut from True Swing Golf.
Yes.
To a more high end or how about core software. Sure. And then I interrupted with the shovelware looking ones. Yeah. But I wanted to call out Hotel Dusk.
Yeah.
Which is not in any way, shape, or form a casual game.
No, absolutely not.
Even more so than Trace the Memory, just in aesthetic, the noir, trappings of this are completely antithetical to basically everything else we have here.
Yeah, absolutely, and it also shows that Nintendo, I don't think, was sure what this really meant at the
Absolutely
end of the day. Is because when you make Elite Beat Agents or Hotel Dusk touch generations games, I don't think they fit the initial guise, which is different types of software that a traditional gamer is not going to play. These games did not sell to grandma and grandpa and auntie and uncle. I don't know, fucking all those people.
Sure.
Elite Beat Agents and Hotel Dusk are games that are cult hits. Yeah. They're not specifically very popular, but to this day still have fan bases within the hardcore gaming community. But the vast majority of this software aren't cult hits. Yeah. They aren't games like, oh, that's an underrated classic on the DS. Oh man, Magnetica! Wow, what a this is just Puzzle Loop or Zuma. It's the exact same thing. But just that's what it's called on DS.
I mean, it's also interesting to me because we did a discussion about Wii a little while ago.
Why Wii was weird? Card in the corner. Go check it out.
Talking about how a lot of Wii software is unified around a singular design language, and there's a very clear packaging focus to making it clear how the Wii worked and getting you integrated into the ecosystem.
Yeah.
This is the complete opposite of that.
Yes.
This completely lacks the clarity of vision. Mm-hmm. That Nintendo had elsewhere in the generation.
Yeah, but I also personally find there to be an appeal to that because I think it would feel a lot more overwhelming if every one of these games had Mii's. I think they probably would have done better. It would have certainly felt a little more cohesive. But part of the appeal to the Wii series of games and to the Wii in general is that it was so cohesive and but there isn't a ton of it. It's not like a 40 game deep catalog that touch generations, especially on DS, is. And if there was Mii Sudoku and Mii Dogs or whatever, Nintendo Math, and Nintendo Golf, these I think would have probably sold better. But I do think that they'd be a little less exciting to look back on because they all would share the same aesthetic and they'd probably be made by similar developers. But I do think that what made exploring this so interesting to me and what makes it so interesting to talk about and be able to pull in Flash Focus and Art Academy into the same conversation with everything else we've been talking about, including Tetris DS, which is a Nintendo developed Tetris game for DS that is one of the best regarded Tetris games by the hardcore community. The fact that you can bring all these very different games with different art styles and developers into conversation under a very loose and kind of horseshit umbrella, I think does make it much more fun to explore because it feels weird. It feels like you're uncovering something. It's obvious which Wii games are Wii series games. It is not obvious what is a Touch Generations game, and I think it allows it to be a more interesting conversation you have to sort of bob and weave out of and do a lot of research into in order to fully understand.
I think that's a fair point for our utilization, but I think that what you're explaining is also a complete marketing nightmare.
Yes, it's also just my justification. It has nothing to do with what would have made these games more successful, what would have made the DS more successful, what Nintendo, I guess, should have done if they really wanted this to be something that was foregrounded rather than a tiny thing in the corner that they never... As far as I know, never really marketed. I don't think there were TV ads or specifically Touch Generations ads in magazines. It might have been. The closest that you get is whenever you open up a Touch Generations game. I just opened up a random one. Let's see if I'm actually right about this. But they each come with a little booklet that tells you about other Touch Generations games.
Oh, that's
if you like Clubhouse games, check out these other great games. Brain Age, Big Brain Academy, Mystery Case Files, Millionaire.
No, I don't want to blow up your segment, but that's in literally every DS game.
No, I know, but these are only Touch Generations games. So that does keep it within a specific wheelhouse. And so if you are just buying one, there is a way, if you open the case and find it in the back, to know about the other touch generations games that might appeal to you if you are a casual purchaser in this time.
Yeah.
But they clearly didn't put it first and foremost, because if they had, we would have gotten Mi Sudoku and all this other nonsense that I think would have been more understandable to the casual game purchaser in the time, because it was so obvious what the Wii stuff was. It was not obvious that this stuff was supposed to appeal to you. You can't even tell from the spine. You can tell from the front if you know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
But there's not the clarity of branding that the Wii titles have.
It's also interesting because, like, Personal Trainer Math, there are several Personal Trainer titles.
Yes.
There were sub-series within this overarching branding, and that's kind of more my point. I wouldn't necessarily want Clubhouse Games to lose a lot of its, like, very clear art direction, or even Nintendogs or any of them. I wouldn't want them all to look the same, but I think you can make an argument for, well, you know, if I'm a branding executive at Nintendo and you're asking me to push this slate of games, I'd probably tell you, you can't ask me to try to market Hotel Dusk in the same breath as Nintendogs or in the same breath as Personal Trainer Math. It just simply doesn't make sense. And that's why it's actually this lack of purpose that to me is interesting to look back on.
Totally.
Just in that Nintendo, as we were talking about in our last video about the generation, was so clear-minded a lot of the time.
Sure.
And so to see them be this scattered is in its own way very interesting.
Yeah.
And there is just cool software that just came out of this. Like Electroplankton here is a great example.
Yeah.
Electroplankton, it's essentially music making software.
Well, it's noise making software.
Yeah, it's like if you want to make fucking ambient music, I guess you could probably make frankly, a lot of the music I listen to when I work, you could probably make an Electroplankton.
Sure, yeah.
But like that's a very compelling game that has a very niche reputation through Smash Brothers, through its re-releases on DSiWare, the individual re-releases there, the general aesthetic, it's just a very compelling game, and I feel that way about
a couple of these. Certainly not most of them.
I was trying to ballpark like maybe 20% of the games on the table. And I think it's interesting that there is this many games that
there's a lot of them. Our table is literally covered in them.
Yeah, that I don't want to play. And that's interesting. Totally. And I think that ultimately in some way maybe is the greatest way to categorize these games in the first place, which is a lot of Blue Ocean software is among my favorite games of all time because I really value simplicity and accessibility. But I don't want to play most of this. Yeah. So I think that unto itself, the fact that, you know, you out of an academic curiosity will pick these up, but you're not going to play them for a couple minutes each.
Yeah.
With exceptions, of course.
Well, Personal Trainer Walking.
With the exception of Personal Trainer Walking. At least on a design level, Nintendo succeeded in making games that aren't for us and thus are for someone else.
Sure.
But I think it's the delivery of that information that they just got wrong.
They bungled that completely. Yeah. Touch generations. Oh man.
Yeah.
I to me, this is the most under-discussed but simultaneously one of the biggest on a title by title basis sector of Nintendo's history.
Yeah.
I had heard about it. Scott DeWaz made a video talking about a couple of these games. So I was lightly familiar as someone that's really into this kind of history, but I didn't know it went this deep. And then technically the iceberg's even bigger with titles released in other countries.
Sure.
And so the reason I will always call myself one of Touch Generation's biggest fans is not because I like almost any of these games. I've played basically all of them and found them to be certainly not for me on like an appeal basis, but some of them are kind of poorly designed. Like I really did not like where'd it go? Oh, Clubhouse Games. I played this game. I thought it was actively poorly designed. And a few of these other ones I thought were bad. But because Nintendo published all these games, and in the current era, there are very, very few Nintendo published games that aren't fully marketed, that don't have some kind of charm behind them, that don't have a marketing budget.
Yeah.
That looking back at all of these games, and like they published how many games that no one talks about and no one cares about, and have no influence on the modern market, I think is absolutely fascinating because it was a very insulated time. There was leak out. The things that were actually successful sort of coalesced and combined with gaming culture to be like, oh, okay, yeah, Brain Age, Nintendogs, Wii Sports. Okay, yeah, we all remember those. Those were cool and expanded what games could be. But there is more expansion of what a game or what software published by Nintendo can be. And I think nowhere is that best exemplified than a fucking Master of Illusion, which teaches you fucking card tricks. And I think the weirdest one by far, God, I can't even find it. Flash Focus, which like trains your like hand-eye coordination and like blinking strength, and like you do these little. And by the way, this is the most bare bones one. Have you ever look at Flash Focus? It's literally like green dots and gray squares. It looks unfinished. It's just bizarre that Nintendo put a lot of effort into this. I mean, this is the teamwork of Nintendo publishing Nintendo. They developed a couple of them, and like 15 teams, most of which now are defunct and have no relevance today. But like they put a lot of effort into this, and it kind of paid off, but it maybe also didn't in some ways.
Yeah, I think the last thing I would just say is that Kotaku, at the end of last year, I think it was, put Wordle and New York Times Connections in their top games of the year list. Yeah. Maybe it was Wordle the year before or whenever it was. Yeah. But I think that's really interesting. Sure. And in some ways, that reminds me of what we're talking about here in a lot of ways. Absolutely. In that, whatever you think, the viewer thinks the baseline for what a game is, the answer is beneath that. Absolutely. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I simply mean that the baseline appeal of what a video game is so simple. And so Flash Focus might be basic, but there's no doubt that this is a game. Yeah. And so I think it would be interesting to pair this philosophy, again, as I mentioned very briefly earlier, with Nintendo's interest in being in more parts of people's lives, with the very clear desire for games that frankly are not much more than personal trainer math. Yeah,
that's actually one of the very few that I have not put into my DS yet. So sorry, guys.
But yeah, if I don't think Nintendo would dedicate resources to a Wordle style game. Yeah. But I also wouldn't see it impossible that DNA comes to them and says, we got this team that makes really good word games. They want to make a Nintendo themed one. We think it'll be really big, and they do it.
Yeah, totally.
It'd be interesting to see when and where this spirit comes back. Because like we mentioned in a couple examples, Ring Fit Adventure, obviously Clubhouse Games, all these series do continue. Mm-hmm. The spirit's around.
It is, yes. So. It has not died off. But if you have any memories with these games, if you have any points about this entire idea, this genre, Flash Focus, God, Touch Generations, these games just they consume me. I can't stop talking about them. Any points about Touch Generations that we didn't bring up? Any interesting facts about the history or foreign games that if you happen to know, feel free to either talk about them in our Discord server or leave those in the comments so that this can be sort of a resource going forward for what the hell is Touch Generations. Maybe that's what we title this video. Sure. But it's Nintendo's forgotten subsect of software. And I think it is definitely worth talking about as a very fascinating chapter of Nintendo's history, and a largely forgotten one. So hopefully we've taught you a little something here. A little something. You learn anything today?
Yeah.
What? All right, quiz me. Or no, I'm quizzing you. What did you learn?
I learned just how poorly to use your money.
Well, and here's the final thing. The reason I don't feel bad about having like literally 40 games on my desk here is outside of 3 key examples, none of these cost me more than $9 to $10. Yeah. Most of them were $4, $5, $6. And so the breadth is overwhelming, but the cost was probably total like a little over $200.
That's not that much.
For this many games that can sit on my shelf and I can feel good about having and it just boosts my self-confidence level. That's priceless, Abram. But most of these are very cheap because no one cares about them. No one wants them. No one plays them. So Touch Generations collecting, totally worth it. You're not going to get much game value out of it, but in terms of if you want to buy a bunch of Nintendo published games, nowhere better to start than Polarium and Master of Illusion and Personal Trainer Math. The highlights, Abram, the highlights.